Great. So George, with all these happy people showing up, you going to take?
Yes, I am. Tom, why don't you open us in prayer?
Love to. Yeah, Father, this is an amazing season of your kingdom that we're witnessing and privileged to live in. And as the world goes into deeper, dark places of hate and violence and racial bigotry, Lord, we believe that your kingdom is the hope of the world. And especially when people in your kingdom come together and build friendship. Thank you for Gary's word last month about the oasis of friendship in Kansas City. Thank you for Steve and Patty and Lord, how they're walking this out with one hope in Eugene. Lord, thank you for William here checking on from Woodburn, Oregon. And Lord, would you open the ears of our hearts today to hear just this unique calling and the unique message you've given to our brother Sam and bringing people of faith together with people of goodwill. And Lord, would you give him fresh joy in sharing and a fresh anointing? So we just commit this gathering with amazing technology to you and speak to us and stir our hearts afresh for the honor of your son. Amen.
Amen. Welcome, everyone. I'm George Ordway. I'll be facilitating this call. It's been a wonderful journey. The last 3 months, we've had 3 topics. The first one has been, I gotta look at my notes here for a second. I lost it. What is the gospel movement? Describing that. And that's not an easy thing to describe because it involves a lot of parts and pieces and cities. The second part, last time we focused on prayer summits, the emphasis of prayer. We got to hear from Gary and the Kansas City prayer experience. Wonderful time also with the buses the time before that. This time we're going to focus on what's a community task force and how to catalyze a task force. Just a little bit about City Advance. Our vision is to see a vibrant, Christ-centered, cross-sector collaboration in every city. We believe the body of Christ needs to engage in the conversation of community, set tables, and allow the leadership within those tables to bring vision and to implement strategies inside cities. One of the uniquenesses we're going to do is we're going to shift gears a bit. We talk a lot about prayer being an essential foundation, and it is. There's nothing that unites people more than prayer. I'm sure you had some fantastic National Day of Prayer experiences yesterday. I love the emphasis of love one another. When you take that spiritual breakthrough experience and you move it into practical change, it has to have some functions to it. It has to have a on-the-ground traction. And that's what we're going to really be in more today, is to talk about how to bring many different voices in a community together in a task force format. So Sam will be featured in that. We're glad to have you here. Sam, why don't you take us into it? And I know you've got a pretty good agenda here on what a task force is. Explain that to us, some illustrations. You got to turn you're muted. Can't hear you yet. You just unmuted your spirit. There you go. Gotcha. Go ahead.
There we go.
All right. Good. Well, welcome everybody. Glad to be with you. I'm very excited to share with you what the Lord has done in my life. 45 years of pastoral ministry in a number of different cities. In the last city where I was serving is Sanger, California, town of about 27,000. 86% Hispanic, 85% free and reduced lunch. That gives you a little bit more of what we experience in terms of our clientele. So as we were pastoring there, we did an event in the city, an outreach gospel event called a Wow Jam. And during that event, just as we were giving the invitation to receive Christ, a 17-year-old kid was shot in the head and killed in a gang-related shooting. And we said, this should never happen again. So we got together with the police chief, the city manager, superintendent of schools, some of the leaders in not faith-based, but the leaders in the community, and said, what must we do? And we started the Sanger Community Task Force. It took about 2 or 3 years for us to get traction. But after that, about 15, 20, 30 people started coming. And now, 10 years later, we have 450 people on our call list. over 90 agencies and organizations that have been a part of the Sanger Community Task Force. It's fully cross-sectored, so all the 7 mountains are represented at the task force meeting. Now, at any time, there'll be between 40 and 50 people that be at the task force meeting. And the task force meeting is outcome-based. It's solutions-based. So whatever bubbles up at the task force, we then say, what are we going to do to meet that need? So some of the needs that have been addressed already in the task force, homelessness was a big deal. Hope Sanger was started. They're now have bought the hotel in the city. Every homeless person's been identified and their needs are being met. And it's through fully collective. There's a high school, Hope Sanger, an actual club that's recognized on the high school. They raised $5,000 last year to help on homeless. 15 churches are involved. Rotary's involved. So you have a number of groups that are involved in helping meet the needs of the homeless. The city council's involved with Hope Sanger. So we're seeing lots of great things happen there. Churches have adopted schools. That came out of the task force. It was a need that the schools had. And the superintendent said, what could happen? And so schools have been adopted, and we've seen a lot of great changes in that. So homelessness, graffiti, we've seen 90 people trained in ASSIST, which is suicide prevention. A CERT team was established, 40 people. That's a citywide emergency response team. That's what CERT stands for, came out of the task force. So a lot of those needs that were talked about then started to be addressed, and then solutions came up. So having every stakeholder there is very, very important. I sent to you a sheet that looks like this, and if you don't have it, you should have it. And so if we look at a definition, city transformation is where there's a catalytic movement that motivates diverse leaders to cooperate around commonly held objectives that transforms lives and communities. That's what we want to see happen. We want to see communities transformed, and that happens through lives. Tom already mentioned it in his prayer. When people of faith work with people of goodwill, you really can see some wonderful things happen. And that's what we've seen happen in Sanger. So about 3 years ago now, George, we said, what could happen if we really put our energy into seeing task force happen all across the nation? So I joined the city advance team, transitioned from being a full-time pastor into being a full-time missionary to cities. And since that time, we've seen task forces now pop up in lots of different places. And just in the last couple of months, Santa Ana, which is a town of 300,000, has started their task force. Up north in California, Marysville, Yuba County, they're started a task force. So we're seeing some traction and seeing some great results in terms of task forces.
Sam, could I ask you, let me just zero in a little tiny bit in case no one has caught what a task force exactly is. So describe your task force, its rhythm.
Okay.
Take us just for a moment into what's happening. I know you meet every other Tuesday, but they may not know exactly what that is.
Yeah, good, George. I'll get into that. So a task force is a group of everybody that meets together, every stakeholder from a city. So you have all the city departments, parks and recreation, building, all that kind of stuff. You have the school district. You have Boys and Girls Club, Rotary, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the health collaboratives. You have all of the different representatives. At our very last meeting, TJ Cox, who is a representative, an assemblyman, came in and presented for 10 minutes at our group. So you have all these different sectors that are in, and they have a voice. So every stakeholder's at the table and everyone has a voice. We start our meeting with an introduction. So everyone at the table introduces themselves and says, this is who I am, this is what I represent. It's not their elevator speech yet, their 90-second speech that says, this is who we are, this is what we do. It's just their name and what they represent. So we know who's at the table. The neutral convener will take an idea of who's at the table and what's represented and what might take place during the meeting. So after that, we do a leadership thought. I've written 150 leadership thoughts. They look something like this. It's a leadership thought. And this one was 8 leadership principles every leader should possess. And this was part 2. And so we give a leadership thought, and then somebody does a prayer. At our last task force meeting, which was Tuesday, April 16th, we held it at a church. So Montalongo was, Pastor Montalongo at Tabernacle of Praise was the host. There were about 50 people there. And as you can see, there's an agenda. So we just put who's at the meeting, and then we let them have a chance to share. And this order changes every time. So one person doesn't go first and then one person doesn't go last. We change it every time so everybody gets a chance to share. So as people are sharing, what we say is leave your agenda at the door and bring your resources. It's amazing what can be done when nobody cares who gets the credit. And we try to build a culture of honor in our task force where we really become friends. We're on a first name basis. And that's what really makes the difference. People have earned the right to be heard. They know that they're going to be heard. And if they have a need, they can come and present it at the task force. And somebody there is going to be able to meet that need. And we see that happen every time. And so when something bubbles up, we're able to see that need being met. It's very exciting. There's clapping and laughter. There's been times when we've had a moment that we've had to stop because it's not faith-based, because 60 to 70% of the people there are from another agency, from Boys or Girls Club, or from a health collaborative, or some kind of an other organization like Rotary or Lions Club. Walmart sends a representative, Initiative Food sends a representative. So we have businesses that are there, and all the agencies, county agencies send a person. So, but sometimes when something comes up, we will stop the meeting and we'll pray. We'll pray for a person. And even the ones that are against that in our group, as it's been developed in such a way to where they accept it. And I even had one non-Christian person say, can we pray for this? I mean, he was obviously non-Christian, but he saw the power in prayer, and having people together like that just makes a big difference. So as we move ahead in terms of what a task force does, when it bubbles up, it could be that there's 3 or 4 people, like when we were dealing with human trafficking bubbled up just about 6 months ago. There were about 4 or 5 people that said, I know somebody who's in this. And at the next meeting, we brought in 3 different faith-based groups that are dealing with human trafficking. And now there's 30 people in our city that have now set up a way. And we had 6 cases of human trafficking in our school district. And so now we've got the school leadership involved in human trafficking, the police department, and then these faith-based groups, and they're coming back and reporting what's being done about human trafficking at our task force. So George, does that sort of answer?
Yeah, yes, it does. So I know there's probably a couple thoughts of, okay, we're Christians. We kind of tend to stay in Christian circles. We use maybe some Christian language because we have common biblical worldviews, assuming that. You're crossing over into dealing in a community-wide basis. How did you get there? And do you see any big hangups or hurdles for people that are ministers like yourself to actually convene task forces?
I think that the church as a whole has abdicated its responsibility to be what Christ asks us to be to our community, and that is love our neighbor as ourselves. And I think that as a church, we need to be leading from the front and not the back. So as the faith-based community says, we are going to engage in our community, and we're going to do it in a respectful way. I think when any person sort of sees that I'm just trying to get another notch in my Bible, I think that that's a deal breaker. I tell many of these folks many times, I love you, I care for you, and whether you become a Christian or not isn't the basis of our relationship. I want you to know Christ, but that's not what I'm about here. I'm building relationship with you. And so over the years, what we've seen happen is I'll get the 2:00 phone call in the morning from the city manager who just lost his mother and didn't know what to do. But because I had relationship with him, he called me and he knows that I love him and I'm not pushing anything down his throat. I think it's much better, instead of giving the answer, to beg the question. Why is Jesus so real? How does he work in your life? And I think more things are caught than taught. If you live out your life as Christ wants you to, it's powerful. I was talking to a guy yesterday at a track meet, and he's a real strong believer, and he's trying to get his head around a task force. He says, you mean you're not there to share Christ with them? Well, yes, I am. But I mean, you're not sharing Christ with them? I said, yes, I am. But you don't tell them about how to receive Jesus. I said, no, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to truly live your life out as a believer and let that happen. And as you build relationships, that's the way it's going to work. And we've seen it so many times happen where a person, because you've developed that relationship, you are now living out the life of Christ before them. Otherwise, you wouldn't have those relationships. I met with a whole group of pastors in a city close by, and there were 2 pastors that raised their hands. They said, I could never be a part of anything like that because they don't let me share my faith. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Who are you sharing your faith with? If you don't, if that seat is empty, you have no relationship and you're not sharing with anybody. But when there's somebody in that seat and you're now making relationships and you're loving them, now you're truly sharing your faith. George?
A couple of things. It's an interesting rhythm that happened in Sanger. A catalytic crisis happened.
Yes.
And it caused people to move out of their individual silos, or individual spheres of influence. It pushed them toward each other. And in that case, a neutral convener, and we're going to talk about that specifically in a minute, a convener had to come to the surface. And Sam was asked to do that. I find that we're good at building individual relationships with people. What we may not be as good with is watching them converge into a larger setting. So the neutral convener role, and let me get a little personal. What's in it for them? I mean, there's got to be a motivator that's asking them to come together too, right? Because, what's in it for them? So what's the neutral convener role? Is it a unique person? Is it a skill set? Can it be taught? And then what's in it for the people around the table?
Yeah. The neutral convener is actually the special sauce of the task force. It's someone who's been called out by the community to be there and to lead the group, to facilitate. It's a person who's already earned the right to be heard. They already have that influence in the community. It's somebody who is respected, who already has relationships with a number of people. So for me, 30% of my job as a pastor was community. So I was already the chairman of the board for the Chamber of Commerce. I was the chaplain for the police department. I usually serve as the MC for the large events like National Night Out and those kinds of things. Tomorrow I'm the MC at the big women's club event. And so people already knew me. They knew my face. They knew who I was. And an amount of respect and credibility had already been given. So to move into the neutral convener role was just a natural process for me. the neutral convener, I believe that there's that person of peace in every community. The scripture talks about that man or woman of peace, and they are the natural neutral convener in a community. And every community has one. They just need to be sought out, and then they need to be taught, because there are skills to neutral convening. When you have that many people in a room, it could get hijacked in a heartbeat. And that's happened, where a person has come in and they have their own agenda and they want to use this group for their own means. And I've had to take them aside, eyeball to eyeball, and say, no, that's not how this works. We're not going to do it this way. As the meeting is going on, you listen with your eyes, you look around, you see what's happening, you see who's engaged and not engaged. You see that person that's really struggling. And then, of course, you always have a kairos moment. A kairos moment is when something was said or something was done that's not going to take over the meeting, but you don't want to miss it. And so you have to be aware of those things so that you can move on to, is this something that we really need to pay attention to? And it's the neutral convener that allows that to happen. George?
What's in it for the people I've been to? So Sam's context is every other Tuesday for 9 years, 50 to 60 people have gotten together. 9 years, every other Tuesday. So that's out a little extraordinary. Sam, what do you think it's in for the people? Why are they coming? What are they getting out of this?
Okay, the task force, we actually, when we first started, thought it should be a 501c3, but then we realized we got we did everything except we said this would kill us. So we meet at a different place every time we meet. So we'll meet at the briefing room in the police department or the city council, or we'll meet at the school district boardroom. We'll meet at the community center. A group will host a meeting. It starts at 8:30 in the morning. They'll bring some nummy crunchers, something good to eat. And there's almost now kind of a competition on who's going to have the best stuff to have. There's this one church that serves a full breakfast, and everybody wants to meet at Calvary Fellowship because, I mean, these guys, they do it. So once we're there, the only way they know where we're meeting next is an email sent out. And so 450 emails are sent out on a Friday and then the Monday before the meeting, because we meet the first and third Tuesday of every month. And what's in it for them? So the person who is the head of the LEAP program, the after school program, and they have, I don't know, probably 1,500 to 2,000 kids involved in the after school program. And the head of the Girl Scouts, a gal named Kathy Ferguson, who's head of all Girl Scouts here in our valley. They were both at the meeting, and Kathy said, I've got this 8-week leadership program for Girl Scouts, and we don't have any place to have it. The LEAP program guy said, hey, I think we can do this. Are you ready? Over 600 girls have gone through the Girl Scout leadership program because that connection was made. That happens almost every time we meet. Somebody has a need, somebody is there that can meet that need, and people keep coming back because that happens. So that's what's in it for them. Not only that, but the first name basis, the relationships that are built. Really the exciting thing about a task force is the task force meeting can be pretty exciting, but it's what happens after the task force. That's where the real gem is, because now they've met somebody that they didn't even know existed. Sometimes in communities, you have duplication of services. So you've got, 6 people that have a food pantry, but the other people don't know that they have it. So now when they say, you got a food pantry, you got it, wow, let's get together. So that's the kind of stuff that happens at a task force.
So Sanger, there's a term called collective impact, and it was a paper written by Stanford University. So you can go on Stanford University and look at collective impact. Sanger was written up as one of the greatest turnaround communities in America by Stanford. The school district was the focus. Behind that was this communication, this conversation, the task force, bringing people together. But collective impact is exactly what he said a moment ago. It's when maybe 3 or 4 organizations have some stakeholder level into one cause, whether it's homeless, human trafficking, whatever, poverty, whatever it is. And they converge together because they're around a table, and it takes off into an initiative that makes changes that are called collective impacts that can be dramatic. The role of the church in that, and then I'm going to open up for questions. So let me just kind of put a ribbon on this part. The role of the church in America today has to take the message of being ambassadors for reconciliation and put it into the street and go ask leaders, how do we converse together? How do we have civil conversations? How do we work toward a community benefit? I believe that the role of the church as a prophetic voice has the ability, as ambassadors of reconciliation, to work with people from many different sectors and bring a civility that ends up with collective impacts. That's what a task force does for me. I've seen them emerge from need and crisis. I've seen them emerge because people they feel like that they're not powerful enough within their organization to get something done, and they see a bigger picture. So task forces, I think, are an essential part of what the church can do, but our voice has to be heard, and we have to practice a community convening to do that. And Sam teaches people how to do that now. But let's open up for questions. Any particular thoughts that have come to your heart that you'd like to share? And say your name, please.
I'll throw out a question. This is Steve Buss.
Yeah, Steve,
And,
good to see you.
So good to see you, Sam. When an idea bubbles up, obviously there's many types of conversation with that many people, and doing it for 9 years, that's amazing. So how do you, when those topics bubble up, how is the discernment or the vetting? It's different every time, but how do you walk away from that meeting with people actually doing something? I'm sure there's been a lot of things that are brought up and just nothing ever happened. So has there been times of discouragement where stakeholders who've participated faithfully bring forth an idea, you talk about it for a couple minutes, and then nothing's done? Can you speak to that, when nothing's done, and then how do you come to a consensus to actually act?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the difference between a task force and an initiative, there are a lot of cities, as I go into them and I find out and they hear about a task force, they say, well, we're already doing that. Well, what they have is they have initiatives. So initiatives are focus-based groups. You have initiatives on crime or homelessness or education or health, or those are initiatives. The task force is everybody at the table at the same time. So when something bubbles up, we find out, we really stop the meeting at that time and we say, okay, who are the stakeholders here at the table that are vested and have a passion about that particular initiative? And then we will appoint someone who seems to be the leader, and that everybody says, yes, you're the leader of this, because we say it right there at the meeting. You'll be the leader. Will you do that? Yes. They're going to meet outside of the task force and come back and report what their findings are. Sometimes it takes 6 months to a year to come up with some kind of a solution. Sometimes it only takes a month. But when they come back, they have to bring a report to us. And they do. They follow through. It's because there's that many people, and they are responsible. They feel responsible. I've got to do this. This is a responsibility I have, and they take it seriously. So that's how it bubbles up. I don't know that there's been anything that we've addressed in our task force that hasn't come back and said, and some things we're continuing to work on. There were over 1,000 gang members in Sanger, Norteños, Sordeños, Bulldogs, and in the Chancla in Sanger, there was a time when you couldn't even walk down there. And so just yesterday, there was a big sweep. So we're still working on gangs. But part of what took place in Sanger is a gang initiative came through the task force, where now if you're a gang member and you're with another gang member, it's already PC to be arrested. And we had to work through a process of about a year to get that gang injunction put in place.
Good, Steve, good question. And again, been to a lot of task forces, so there's a little difference between the missional type purpose, vision-driven organizations that we have, and assuming that the initiatives that we're carrying, our particular mission, vision, purpose, is going to be projected on people. You can't do that at a task force.
Right.
Task force is a pure, secure roundtable. And it allows everyone to have a voice. And when the voices come up, the facilitator picks up, as you said so well, he discerns that one. Let's emphasize and empower it. That one, let's redirect it for another time. And so the task force really is an open community conversation. The involvement and commitment of the people that come actually empower them to do the work.
Yeah. One time this gal came in, she just lost her brother through suicide, and she blamed the police for it. So she came in loaded for bear, and the police chief was there, and the CSO was there. And I mean, she just lit into him right there at the meeting. And I stopped the meeting. I actually got up, walked around to her and called her by name. And I said, you know, we're really sorry for your loss. And we really do want to help you. And we're going to set up a meeting between you and the police department to be able to dialogue about this. That was a Tuesday. On that Thursday, she came into my office and she received the Lord. She actually prayed the prayer. She came back and apologized to the task force for what she did. And then she got involved in it, not my church, in another church that fit her need better. And she's now an advocate for the police department in what they're doing. So those kinds of things are what take place at a task force, which is pretty exciting. I mean, really.
So one other dynamic is task forces, Sam's in a 25,000 population city. So everyone knows everyone. So it's a little bit easier dynamically to pull that together. So Sam, how do you deal with that when you're in a 300,000 or 500,000 population city? How do you see task forces functioning in that kind of a? Yeah,
so in a town like Santa Ana, for instance, where they just had their very first task force meeting. The neutral convener in that is a guy named Dave Elliott. And Dave is just a phenomenal guy. He is Mr. Connector. He's the CEO president of the Santa Ana Chamber. And so he's called together a group of people. There's about 40 of them, 50 of them that meet. And what they've done is they've found 5 specific areas where they're working: youth, crime, homelessness. And at their very first meeting, they found 5 individuals who are going to speak to those issues. And when they meet on May 21st, they're going to come back and they're going to report on the groups that they met with. For instance, the one that was involved in youth, a guy named Steve Bressler, who's a crew guy with Campus Crusade and on staff at Saddleback, he became the person who was going to oversee the youth part of that. So he's pulled together about 25 other people that have already met. They've talked about what the issues are, and he's then going to come back and report to what they discovered. So in a bigger city, that's one way. Another way is that you break the city down into high schools or communities, maybe even voting districts, and they create their own task force within that, and they have their own task force meeting, and once or twice or 3 or 4 times a year, they meet together in one large task force with all the neutral conveners there. And so that's another way that's been going about having a task force.
Good. Other questions?
Yeah, Sam, this is Alan Doswald.
Hey, Alan.
And hi, we're just in the same city. We should talk more often. This is very interesting. I'm thinking about Fresno. Our metro area is about 600,000. And you and I have talked about this before, how we could do this in a big city. And we have chronic problems that for over a decade, we have had one seminar conference after another dealing with homelessness, and it's worse than ever.
Yeah.
And have you seen, Sam, a task forces like it would be like a homeless task force, but it's an ongoing, not a side task force, but an ongoing task force in the city till the problem's solved. But but including all the players that have the ability to help solve it. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, that's what we did in Sanger. That's specifically what we did in Sanger. We have the mayor that's on that homeless initiative, along with faith-based, along with the school district. There's 121 homeless kids in our school district that have been identified. And so when we identified them, we're working with the care team, which is a set of psychologists that are a part of the school district, about what are we doing to address that. And we've actually found Section 8 housing for some of those families. So
did you do this as a subset of your citywide task force, or did you split off another task force to focus on just homelessness?
No, it came out of the task force, and then this became a subset.
Okay.
And then they come back and report to the task force what's being done.
Great. Sounds great.
So they meet outside. The human trafficking group, they meet outside and then come back and report. Some of the businesses with Chamber of Commerce, in terms of economic development, they meet outside of the task force and come back. The mayor is usually there and shares what's going on in the city. Usually a representative like Patterson's office or Vidac's office, they're there at our meeting, and they always give a report on what's happening statewide and some nationwide. So those people are there and they share what's happening also.
That's great. We'll talk, Sam. I'll give you a call.
Good. There is another example, Alan, in one of Marysville, Yuba City, two communities right next to each other came together. They have a homeless consortium. It's been meeting for a little while, and it's about 70 leaders that are focused specifically on that subject. And so, yes, those can be initiative-driven type task forces, and you know that because you've started some of those. But other questions?
Great.
Anybody else? Well, why does the church need to be involved with task forces?
What I have found is that we need to develop relationships. And I think the church has sort of had mission drift. The church thinks its job is to do church. So the church is doing church, and it stays within the four walls. And somehow we've got to get Christians off their blessed assurance and engaged in the community. And what happens in a task force is now you are rubbing shoulders with leaders and people that are in the community who aren't faith-based. They're not involved in church. And these are really good people. They're doing great things in our community, and they really care. And when we get to come alongside and we rub shoulders with them and love them and earn the right to be heard, powerful things happen. And we really get to share our faith in exciting ways. And so to me, that's one of the reasons why faith-based really ought to be involved in a task force. And I also believe that it should be led by faith-based. I think the church really should be leading from the front and not the back. And so I really try to find someone who is in faith-based to be the person of peace, to be the neutral convener, because then you really do have direction and it will be led in that particular way.
Good. Another question, and I have an illustration if someone doesn't have a question. So there's a pastor named Richard Walker who's in a community named Chowchilla who happens to sit on the city council of that community. And Sam has worked with the city manager in another city, and he moves to this city. And so he calls up and says, you guys have to have a task force here in Chowchilla. And so we meet with Richard and Brian, and the next thing we know, the second meeting, we're in front of the city council at Chowchilla, making a proposal to have them fund a task force. That's been about 2 years now. And so one of the city council members became the neutral convener. Sam trained him. They started off down the road of let's making it kind of government looking. Sam quickly diversed it again, made it. And so that's one way a task force started, through a city council funding it. Another way that it started through Pat Coyle, a pastor of nearly 20 years in Shafter, California, who one day woke up, and we think this is what's happening, and that's why Taskforce is on this call. He woke up one day to the community and said, I've been working in this city for 20 years, and I now see the scope of the city in a way I never saw it before. I see my constituency not as people who come to my church, but I see my constituency as an entire city. And his life started to change, and he started looking around, and he found Sam. He's had a relationship with Sam in the past, and Pat Coyle is his name. Pastor Pat says, come to Shafter because something's happened in me and something's happened around me, and I'm not exactly sure what to do with it. So all of a sudden, Sam sat with Pat. A couple meetings later, he said, let's just start a task force. So Pat invited some friends and people from the community, and now it's been about 6 months, if I remember right. And so Pat is in this seat, and all of a sudden he's got a flood of people coming to the table from every sector in the community because a pastor now is pastoring a city. So we think that's what's the church. We think that there are pastors who are going to step across and they're going to recognize they're being pulled into or they're being drawn into this role of being able to be pastors in a community. And Task Force just give us a table. We can't ask the community to come to a prayer summit and accept the prayer method that we use, but we can go to their language and set a conversation table because that's what they understand. And inevitably, every time I've ever been at one of these, there was some Kairos moments. There was some unique moments from I believe, God moments.
Yeah.
So whether it comes from a city or it comes from a business guy, I've seen it do that. It comes through a pastor who really gets a wow moment, or it comes through a community leader like us who are mission-driven agencies, Christian agencies. We recognize that if we don't collaborate as agencies, we lose power. We don't have the ability to influence fully. I mean, Matt's here on the call from New Jersey, Star of Hope. It's been about 30 to 40 years. Star of Hope has been an integral part of Paterson, New Jersey. But they have a strength of collaborative effort, and that's happened through building relationships. Why don't we take the Christ reconciliation call and the collaborative skills that we have and take those out into a community setting?
That's very good.
So,
William, tell us about what's happening in Woodburn.
Well, an interesting thing happened on our road. So when you guys had the city advance up in Portland, I sat in Sam's breakout session and talked to them about city advance, about the task force. We planned a launch for September of 2019, which is coming up soon. And then 2 years ago, Salem Health approached us and said, would you apply for a grant to start a city task force? And we said, sure. When would you like to do that? And they said, we'd like to launch in September of 2017. So God apparently had a little different timetable for us because we were going to try and get everything together and align everything. So we started that. Our task force meets once a month. It's primarily based upon getting silos of service that are isolated to come together and work together. We're trying to break out and do some more upstream stuff. We're not gaining a lot of traction with that yet. So we have 68 different agencies that have attended, come to the table. We have anywhere from 25 to 50 people who show up once a month on Kurt, the second Tuesday. And we sit around and discuss things. Most of ours is about sharing resources that are available in the community. So Kurt and I co-convene it. I facilitate it. Love Inc. is the fiscal sponsor. Another one was started in the North Marion School District area. Love Inc., Love in the Name of Christ is the fiscal sponsor for that. Kurt and I are also the co-executive directors for Love Inc. of North Marion County. And so we're with that. We just met this week with Salem and trying to get them to start a task force and to do some stuff, service integration. So we're just kind of in over our heads, not knowing what to do. So Salem Hospital has funded that with about $5,000. They're talking about upping that to 10. Marion Pope Early Learning Hub gave us a 2-year grant of almost $15,000. City of Woodburn came alongside of us and said, we'd like to give you $5,000 to pay city water bills. They had given that to one agency who used $0. The second agency they gave it to used $1,700. We burned through that 5, asking for another 5. They said yes. They were monitoring our shared spreadsheet. And they said, we'd like to give you an additional final installment of $5,000. So we'll go through about $15,000 this year from the city of Woodburn to help people pay their water bills. They don't want to shut it off. They see that as the next step to homelessness, and they don't want that to occur in their city. Poor image for them is to shut people's water off, ending up with that issue. So we've got a lot of things going on. We're in over our heads. We're thinking about doing a second meeting a month just to deal with upstream issues, homelessness. Woodburn with the Woodburn Company stores is one of the highest human trafficking areas in the nation, certainly on I-5 corridor. Our police chief is all on board with that. Our city mayor was elected and began his term in December. He's meeting with us on a regular basis. City manager invites us in and says, can we develop some meeting places for nonprofit? Those are things that are happening in our community. We're just in over our heads and we need help. So we're planning on getting a hold of you, Sam, and asking for some more consultation.
That's exciting. We've come to the end of our call, so I think we might have had a Kairos moment there. Alan has been a part of ESA Love Inc. for 38 years or some 40 years, and Alan, loved to hear what you just said.
I just wrote down to get a hold of these guys.
We just had a task force moment.
Can I interrupt with a quick question?
Go ahead, please.
Go ahead, Kurt.
This is Kurt up in Woodburn with Bill. So Bill's comments just reminded me of a question we've been wrestling with, Sam, that maybe you can help with. So what we found, probably because of our connection with Love Inc. and the needs, our task force kind of spends a lot of time compared to what you're talking about down in the weeds with specific needs for specific people. You know, an agency comes, says, we have a client, we've helped with this, but what they really need is that. What can we do? And it's great networking collaboration. Do you ever have a tendency to pull down in the weeds within a, you know, it's a great thing, but it kind of takes away the larger vision. That
No, the task force stays at the 50,000 foot level. We let the people that are a part of the task force, they are boots on the ground. So we let them come back and share what the weeds look like. So your task force has actually taken a different different direction. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but you now are, because you've received money as a task force and those kinds of things, you're now put yourself in the weeds by doing water bills and those kinds of things. So we've seen that as a task force, if you want to stay as a task force where it is all the stakeholders finding out what the needs are, you might want to, for the task force to flow better, you might want to find somebody who's doing that as an initiative and let them handle that.
So, you know, I'm going to drop in here. We're all in Oregon. We're all in deep weed up here.
Yes, you are. Deep weed.
And I'm going to be in deep weeds if I don't move to the airport now. You know, you could go on all day if you like, but this is on my account, and I think if I hit my little button, it's going to cut the meeting. It's going to.
We're done. We're scheduled to be done by now. So,
but we'll talk, Kurt. We'll talk, William. Kurt. We'll talk. We'll get that going.
And I'll find you guys. This is Alan from Fresno.
Oh, Alan, I know you're always just kind of on the fringes, listening in. You're tracking.
Okay, just don't
your group, Tom.
Don't tell National what we're doing with our Love Inc.
Yeah, Alan, you should come up to Woodburn and find out something from some people who don't know what they're doing. Because
in the middle of summer in Fresno, I would be glad to come to Oregon.
Alan, why don't you pray, Alan, and we'll close this call.
Okay, Lord, thank you for the opportunities you give us to be salt and light, to make a difference. Lord, I thank you for George. I thank you for Sam, who's pioneered this. I was out there when that kid was killed, and it woke up that city. And so, Lord, wake us up and help us, Lord, to show your love to people. Help us to do things that are constructive and will help people in the name of Christ in our cities. So guide us, Lord. Help us to know your will and do your will. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
And if you have any other questions or you need, just contact me. I'd love to help any of you to move on with your task force.
Have
Great
a
meeting,
time.
Thanks,
Okay.
George and
See
Sam.
you in June.
Thanks, you guys.
Take care.
Thanks, you guys.
See ya.
we'll
Have a
see
good
you next
weekend.
time.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye now.